Let me tell you something that's going to shake the way you view silence in relationships, especially when you're dealing with someone avoidant. When they go quiet, when they disappear, when they fall off the face of the earth, your first instinct is to think, they don't care. I don't matter. This is indifference. But here's the psychological truth nobody told you. For the avoidant, silence isn't disinterest. Silence is emotional warfare. And the battlefield is inside them. You see, most people think love is expressed through connection, words, actions, presence. But with an avoidant, love often shows up first as fear. And that fear doesn't mean the love isn't real. It means the love is so real, so potent, so destabilizing that their nervous system interprets it as a threat. That's how deeply wired this defense mechanism is. These are a person who has trained themselves to believe that intimacy equals danger, that getting close to someone equals losing themselves. So when they start catching feelings, it's not a joyful moment. It's a crisis. They're not pulling away because they don't feel something. They're pulling away because they feel everything. And they don't know how to survive it. Avoidants have a core fear of engulfment. That psychological language for this haunting belief. If I let you in, I lose me. They spent years, maybe decades, building walls to keep themselves safe. They don't just fear your love, they fear what your love does to them. Because when they start needing you, thinking about you, craving your presence, it shakes their identity. It shatters their illusion of independence. And that illusion is their oxygen. And when love threatens it, they go into emotional suffocation mode. So what do? They retreat. They vanish. They shut down emotionally. Not to hurt you, but to regain control over themselves. Silence becomes a survival strategy. And here's the kicker. They're not just going silent on you. They're going silent on themselves. They don't want to hear the voice inside saying you care. Because if they acknowledge that, then they have to risk, they have to feel, they have to change. And change terrifies them. This is where most people get confused. They assume that distance is a sign of apathy. But in avoidance psychology, distance is a coping mechanism for attachment overload. Think about that. The very presence of love, the very connection you're dying to offer is what floods them. And so they run, not because they want less of you, but because they don't know how to hold the weight of what they're feeling. And let's be clear, this doesn't excuse emotional neglect. This doesn't mean you tolerate breadcrumbs or emotional manipulation. But what it does mean is that when an avoidant goes silent, you need to understand the why, not for them, but for you. So you don't internalize their withdrawal as a reflection of your worth. Their silence isn't your failure, it's their inner chaos. In fact, silence is often the avoidance paradoxical love language. It's clumsy, it's backwards, it's broken, but it's real. Because in their world, avoiding you isn't forgetting you. It's them fighting to contain you in their mind without letting you destroy the emotional order they've clung to their whole life. So when they go quiet, don't just ask, why aren't they speaking? Ask instead, what are they trying not to feel? Because if silence is the shield, love is the sword that pierced through it. Let that sink in. So let's talk about something deceptively simple. Those small, seemingly meaningless moments where an avoidant pops up in your world. A random, hey, out of nowhere. A like on your story. Watching your content without ever engaging. Most people brush this off as nothing, an accident, a glitch in the matrix. But what if I told you those micro interactions are not accidental at all? What if they're actually emotional SOS signals sent from someone who's too scared to speak in full sentences? Here's the raw truths. When an avoidant checks in without connecting, they're not reaching out because they're ready to reattach. They're reaching out because they can't detach. That difference matters. They're trying to touch you without holding you. Stay close enough to not feel abandoned, but far enough to not feel engulfed. It's a survival tactic disguised as apathy. You've got to understand how emotional intimacy feels to someone who has built their identity around self-reliance. Connection feels like exposure. It feels like standing naked in the middle of a battlefield. No weapons, no armor, no exit plan. So instead of vulnerability, they substitute proximity. Instead of conversation, they offer presence from a distance. They stay close enough to know but not close enough to risk anything real. This is the classic psychological push-pull dynamic. What you're seeing isn't confusion. It's conflict, a war between their need to connect and their reflex to protect. When an avoidant person sends that hey, they're not just testing the waters with you, they're testing themselves. Can I handle contact? Can I control my emotions this time? Can I be near her without losing myself again? It's emotional breadcrumbing, yes, but it's not always manipulative. Sometimes it's the only strategy they know. They've been conditioned, often from childhood, to believe that direct communication leads to pain, that open expression leads to rejection. So instead, they hide their feelings behind safe gestures. A comment on your post, an emoji, a short message at midnight. These aren't empty actions. These are emotional Morse code. I miss you, I think about you, but I can't say it because saying it makes it real. And real terrifies me. Here's where it gets deep. An avoidant's core fear isn't just emotional closeness, it's emotional dependency. The moment they realize you affect their mood, their peace, their identity, the panic sets in. That's when they go dark. That's when the breadcrumbs show up. Because staying out of your life entirely is unbearable, but coming back in fully is overwhelming. So they choose a middle path, unspoken connection, silent reach outs, ghostly presence, and most people misinterpret this as indifference. But indifference doesn't check your stories at 2 a.m. Indifference doesn't reappear after silence. Indifference doesn't maintain invisible ties. This isn't detachment, this is suppressed attachment. And it's a completely different emotional ecosystem. They love you, but they've buried it under layers of fear, pride, and survival instinct. What looks casual to you is calculated to them. What looks weak to you is strategic to them. They're trying to control love by controlling how they love. And the irony, they lose control every time they reach for you. So if they're checking in without connecting, know this, you're still in their emotional orbit. You haven't been forgotten, you've been compartmentalized. And that's not rejection, it's a sign of how dangerously deep their feelings run. The question isn't, are they thinking about you? The question is, can they handle what they feel when they do? Remember this, the avoidant doesn't reach out to reconnect, they reach out to remember. Have you ever noticed how an avoidant seems the most affectionate one moment, letting you peek behind the curtain of their guarded world, only to slam that curtain shut the instant real closeness is achieved? That sudden chill feels personal, like a slap of rejection. But the paradox is this, the retreat usually signals the precise moment love becomes undeniable for them. When an avoidant feels safe enough to relax their vigilance, even briefly, their nervous system reads that safety as loss of control. The experience of emotional security you crave is for them a flashing red warning light. Danger. True intimacy detected. Psychologically, this stems from what attachment researchers call a deactivating strategy. Think of it as an internal emergency brake wired into their relational circuitry. The moment their heart rate quickens in response to authentic connection, the brake slams down. They pick a fight over nothing, claim they need space, or dive into work with monastic obsession. These behaviors aren't meant to punish you. They're attempts to regulate an internal panic we rarely see on the surface. Philosophically, you could say they're protecting the sovereignty of the self. Love threatens the borders of the identity they worked years to fortify. Any sign that you might cross those borders by being consistently warm, accepting, or simply present activates an existential defense. If we exist, where do I end? Now here's the counterintuitive mystery. If you didn't matter, there would be no need for such defenses. An avoidant doesn't waste energy erecting walls against strangers. They only invest in armor where the stakes are highest, where attachment feels primal, where losing the other would feel like losing oxygen. Your closeness surfaces the very wounds that created their avoidance in the first place. Childhood moments where need met rejection, vulnerability met ridicule, dependency met abandonment. In the echo chamber of memory, the mind declares, never again. So when you step into the space those old echoes still occupy, the reflex is to shove you out before history repeats itself. But there's a deeper layer. Self-sabotage is also an unconscious test. They're asking, will you still choose me if I'm difficult, if I'm erratic, if I make intimacy labor instead of gift? They don't articulate it, but they're searching for proof that your care can survive their chaos. The tragedy is that the very test designed to confirm love often destroys the conditions where love thrives. Yet if you recognize the pattern, you can refuse the invitation to chaos without abandoning compassion. You hold your ground, calm, boundaried, present, showing them what constancy looks like without collapsing their autonomy. Notice the paradox. The closer you get, the more they pull back, and the pullback itself is evidence you are getting closer. That means your presence is touching nerves no one else has reached. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it's confusing, but understanding transforms pain into information. Now you can decode their withdrawal. My nearness just triggered their emergency system. This is proof of depth, not lack. With that lens, you stop chasing and start observing. You let the brake engage without internalizing the squeal. You give space without disappearing. You model regulated intimacy, proximity without pressure. In that regulated space, they can slowly learn that staying doesn't equal drowning. None of this suggests tolerating chronic disrespect. Boundaries are the oxygen mask you both need. But when the first cold front blows in after a heat wave of connection, pause before you interpret it as final winter. Remember that what feels like rejection is often the nervous system's awkward declaration, I feel too much. If you can meet that declaration with steady self-respect, you give the relationship its only real chance to evolve beyond the reflex of retreat. So the next time they push you away right after opening up, see it for what it is, evidence that love has crossed the threshold of their defenses, and they're scrambling to survive. Leave them wondering how you stayed calm in the storm, and watch how curiosity begins to replace fear. Let me draw back the curtain on one of the most misunderstood behaviors in an avoidant partner: the illusion of forgetfulness. They act as if your birthday slipped their mind, as if they can't recall the song that played on your first road trip, as if your favorite coffee order was never registered. But behind that poker face is a mind running a private archive of astonishing precision. An avoidant survival system relies on pattern recognition, tracking conditions, moods, micro-expressions, because control is their primary currency. So while they give you a casual shrug, their subconscious is stitching together a high-resolution map of you. The way you wrinkle your nose when you disagree, the exact minute you stop texting back, the color you wore the day they first felt safe. Neurologically, this makes sense. Hypervigilance is common in attachment wounds. The nervous system, primed for abandonment, scans for threat the way radar scans for storms. Every detail becomes data. How fast did she reply? Did his tone shift when I mentioned my past? What was the look in her eyes when I said I was busy? On the surface, cool, detached. Underneath, full sensory recording in 4K. That's why months later, they can quote something you said offhand or suddenly reference a minor goal you mentioned once at 3 a.m. They never forgot. They filed it under critical intelligence. Philosophically, memory is how we grant meaning to experience. To forget is to deprioritize. To remember is to honor. An avoidance covert remembrance reveals what they won't admit. You occupy priority real estate in their inner world. But acknowledging that openly would violate their prime directive, self-protection through emotional minimalism. So they disguise memory as coincidence. Oh, I just happened to pass that bakery you love and grabbed your favorite pastry. Nonsense! They planned that detour. The gesture is their encrypted confession. I know you. I study you. You matter more than I can handle. Because of selective amnesia also serves a defensive function. If they admit they remember, they risk being accountable for caring. Caring invites obligation, and obligation threatens autonomy. Better to pretend ignorance than to risk the vulnerability of responsibility. But watch their actions in crisis. The second you withdraw, they notice instantly. They don't need reminders. Their nervous system hits the alarm, cataloging the date, the hour, the digital breadcrumb that signaled your distance. Why? Because your absence jeopardizes the equilibrium they've engineered. You think they're indifferent, but inside they're scrambling. Why did she go quiet on May 4 at 11:07 p.m.? What did I miss? Understanding this helps you set boundaries without taking their facade at face value. When they feign ignorance, don't argue, simply note the incongruence. Hold your standard. I know you remember. When you're ready to be honest about that, we can talk. You neither shame them nor collude with the charade. That stance, steady, respectful, but unyielding, invites them into a different relational ethic, one where memory is shared instead of hidden. Remember, the goal isn't to extract constant proof of their recollection. It's to recognize that their memory already proves the depth of their attachment. Your task is to live by your own truth, not beg for theirs. When you stop arguing over whether they remember, you free yourself to observe how they use that memory to connect or to control, to comfort or to evade. From there, you decide what you'll allow. So the next time they act like the past evaporated, trust what you've seen. Their silence is filled with details, their eyes are photographic lenses, and their heart, though barricaded, is recording every moment you share. And here's the takeaway that can change the way you show up. Their hidden memory of you is undeniable evidence of impact. Use that knowledge to stand tall, not to chase. Let's go deeper into the part most people miss, the tension that builds in an avoidant person when they watch you rise. Not when you beg, not when you chase, but when you finally turn your energy inward. When you stop performing for their approval, stop orbiting around their silence, and start expanding in your own life. That is the moment their emotional system short circuits. See, most people assume avoidants only value distance, but what actually destabilizes them is not distance, it's your independence without resentment. It's when you detach with dignity, not drama. That's when the game they've subconsciously played loses its structure. You're not punishing them. You're just evolving beyond their emotional reach. And here's the irony. The more emotionally self-contained you become, the more they feel the weight of what they're losing. Not because they're suddenly more available, but because for the first time, they're confronted by something that terrifies them more than closeness: irrelevance. Understand this. Avoidants aren't afraid of being alone. They're afraid of no longer mattering. You becoming emotionally self-sufficient challenges their internal narrative that says, I'm safest when I don't need or get too close to anyone. When you stop needing them, they can't place themselves in the hero or the escape role anymore. You've dismantled the entire psychological scaffolding they built their identity on. This shift in dynamic hits them hard because philosophically it confronts their ego structure. The avoidant ego thrives on control of space, of pace, of perception. They were comfortable when you were anxious, seeking, always knocking on a door they could choose to open or ignore. But now, you're not at the door, you've walked into a different room entirely. That's when they start doing things that contradict everything they've said. A vague message, a memory sent your way, a question that doesn't need to be asked, except it does. Because it's not about the answer. It's about checking the temperature. Are they still on your mind? Do they still affect you? The more grounded you become, the more transparent their emotional confusion becomes. They'll try to reassert old roles, initiate small dramas, or act as if nothing changed, but it did. You did. And that unsettles them because they didn't expect you to grow without their permission. But independence isn't rebellion, it's reality. You rising is not an act of revenge, it's a return to your center. And here's where you gain your greatest power. When you grow with love, not spite. When your silence isn't punishment, it's peace. When your transformation isn't a strategy, it's truth. That's when the avoidant begins to feel the gravitational shift. Not because you pushed them, but because you pulled your energy back. And when they feel that absence, not the loud absence of anger, but the silent absence of emotional dependency, it echoes louder than anything you could have said. This is where they begin to reflect, not in the heat of the fight, but in the quiet after. When your absence is no longer reactive, but radiant. You've moved forward, and now their inner world has to recalibrate. And whether they return or not, something has shifted forever. They now know you are not waiting, you are becoming. So the next time you think they're unaffected by your glow up, your boundaries, your new silence, think again. Avoidants don't chase validation, but they do feel the tremble when someone they care for no longer orbits their fear. They may not say it, but deep down they're asking, how did she outgrow my silence? How did she heal the thing I still run from? And here's what I want you to hold on to. Your healing doesn't just free you, it forces them to confront the very thing they've been avoiding all along, themselves. There's something strangely telling about how an avoidant handles your emotional expression. especially the raw kind, the kind that isn't rehearsed, filtered, or perfectly timed. The moment you cry in front of them, not out of manipulation, but truth, they don't rush to comfort you. In fact, they may go quiet, freeze, or even walk out. And in that instant, most people make a devastating mistake. They assume their emotions were too much, that they scared love away. But what if I told you that moment, that reaction is not rejection? It's reverence wrapped in fear. See, avoidants are often raised in emotional deserts, environments where vulnerability was dangerous, where feelings meant weakness or chaos, or worse, became weapons used against them. So when you break down in front of them, they're not disgusted, they're disoriented. You just stepped into sacred territory and they don't have the tools to navigate it. Emotions for them aren't just feelings, they're alarm. And tears, that's a fire they don't know how to put out. But here's the twist most never see. If they didn't care, they wouldn't freeze. Indifference has no reaction. If you were just another person, your pain wouldn't rattle them. But it does. Why? Because your vulnerability threatens the wall they built their survival on. It says, I trust you enough to fall apart here. And to someone who has lived in emotional isolation, that trust feels both holy and terrifying. There's a philosophical irony here. What you see as weakness, crying, cracking open, revealing your truth, is actually an act of strength most avoidants admire, but don't know how to mirror. They don't reject your depth because it's repulsive. They pull away because it exposes how unpracticed they are in emotional presence. You just showed them a version of love they've never mastered. You became the mirror reflecting everything they've avoided within themselves. This is where you must rise above the impulse to retreat or shrink. And don't apologize for your heart. Don't rush to fix their discomfort. You are not the problem. You are the invitation. An invitation for them to grow beyond avoidance, to witness what emotional safety actually looks like, even if it scares them. Let your presence